Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil Live. I'm Mike King, and it's really great to see you. Thanks for joining in with us today. The back office is kind of in the back helping out. They're all coming from their day jobs, and we have a special guest coming on in a few minutes. And I want to just jump right in and start answering some questions and kind of keep you updated on things that we're doing at Profiling Evil. So it's really great to see you, Diane Phoenix. Thanks for being on so early. Jamie Girl, thank you. And I'm going to the guys are going to start popping questions up. So start firing questions. This is going to be like a couple of weeks ago. We're going to get right to work. We're going to talk about some things, and then we're going to give you the rest of your night off or back, and you can go surf some other sites, and then I'll jump over to another commitment that I have. So we'll get rolling here. Again, we have a special guest. Dr. Amy Salerno is going to be joining me in a minute. I asked her to look at my assessment of the Brian Laundrie autopsy, and then come in and chat a little bit about some of the thoughts that she might have after looking at that, and I'll share some information on that. I did think it might be kind of interesting to show you a place where you can go and get the B.O.L.O. So if you haven't been signing up for the B.O.L.O, you can go just to profilingevil.com, and right at the top, click on that little button that says B.O.L.O newsletter, and that will take you right over to the newsletter where you can sign up and get that information whenever. Don't miss the chance. I hope you've all picked up Profiling Evil books, She Knew No Fear and Deceived. You can order those there. Then you can go in, and since we're talking Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie tonight, you can jump right in and look at this. And Robin Wolf, you're right on. Heard he was right-handed, shot in the left temple. That's a magic trick shot, isn't it? So let's talk about that a little. We're going to talk about it in more detail. But yeah, a right-handed person would normally stick the weapon up to their right temple and pull the trigger, or it's kind of gross, but put it in their mouth or something like that. Put it under the chin. But if they were right-handed and strong right-handed, and that's why it would be so important if they had gunshot residue or other kinds of things, which they don't in a decomposed body, you'd want to know if there was gunshot residue on the right hand, because that's kind of a trick shot to do this. Not necessarily impossible because of the angle, and I'm going to talk about the angle in a minute. So we're going to chat about that, and why did he choose to do it with the left hand? Was he videotaping or videotaping? Was he using his camera? What was the situation that was going on there? But we'll look at that. So go to Profiling Evil, and you can sign up for the B.O.L.O. You can go through and you can catch our merchandise, and we don't want you to ever miss out on that. But this is a part we're really excited about this year, our focus on cults. And you can go in and start to get up to date on our cult stuff. And man, I had a wild week this week looking into a pretty bizarre cult that I actually went out in the field and met with a longtime nemesis of mine. So anyway, hope you'll go through that and spend some time on that site. Let's see what else we got here. Sally Langadorf, thank you. Hello, are you following the movie theater trial? And how come it's 8 years? And how do you think you'll be charged? So, Sally, if you watch my weekly recap on Thursday of this week, I'll actually chat a little bit about Curtis Reeves, the movie Popcorn Killer, and talk about that. I actually was on court TV Monday morning during the opening arguments, weighing in with a defense attorney about my thoughts on the movie theater, the popcorn shooting. And for those who haven't paid attention to this, this is kind of a crazy case. This is a highly decorated police officer from Florida who was a SWAT commander, was in charge of Busch Gardens security after he retired, highly thought of, went into a theater, had another cop a few seats down from him, and family members. They were watching the film Lone Survivor, happened 8 years ago on Valentine's Day, and yesterday kicked off the trial, Valentine's Day, which is really pretty amazing. when you think about the impact. Husband and wife went there on Valentine's to catch an early show, and the husband was texting away during the opening credits of the film, and this 81-year-old man at the time, or 71-year-old man, I'm trying to remember. No, I think he was 81. Anyway, he got angry, kicked his chair, told him to turn off the phone. The guy started yelling back. Testosterone was flowing like crazy. He went out, the older fellow, the retired cop, went out, complained to management, came back in. The guy with the phone finally had enough, turned around, and there was a confrontation. And in that confrontation, the guy reached across and grabbed the cop's popcorn, threw it at him, and the cop instinctively pulled his weapon. And this is an older man, pulled his weapon in a fraction of a second and shot the man and killed him. And so the question is, was it a second-degree homicide like he's been charged? Was it stand your ground like the defense is claiming, that he was feeling threatened? And man, I'll tell you what, the cost of popcorn is a lot, but it certainly isn't worth a life. And this has been tragic. Zambia. So please go back, watch Court TV, watch what we're doing. I'll talk about it on Thursday. That was a long, rambling thing. How does he stay at home after this crime in the popcorn case for 8 years? So he was on home confinement, put an ankle bracelet on him and told him, you have to stay there in the house. And he sat there for that 8 years, other than to go see his attorneys and other things. So that's how he was able to do it. And isn't it something, though, when we talk about due process and the fact that people deserve to have their cases moving along, that it was 8 years until this thing made it to trial? Alicia B., do you think we will be getting any info from the FBI on what was found? Example, suicide note. I'm assuming we're talking about Brian Laundrie in this particular case. And I don't believe that they will share some of that information, although I think we've heard that there was an indication that he did write in his notebook something to the effect of claiming responsibility. So whether there was more to that, Alicia, I don't know for sure. I'm quite frankly surprised that the medical examiner released the detailed report that they released. So that's going to be interesting. Let's see, Candalee Woodward Stone. And hey, thanks everybody. Don't forget, you can super chat. You can look at our channel memberships. All of that stuff helps us stay afloat and is really appreciated. But we'll keep taking questions like this too. So Candalee, do you think maybe the criminal they found in the woods while searching for Brian could have shot him? Crazy idea, but man, I'll tell you what, as my buddy Mark Safrick, former FBI profiler, he and I chat about this a lot, and we always go back to, is it possible? And absolutely, all of these things are possible. But I want to talk tonight with Dr. Salerno, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the behavior just from what we learned in the autopsy report. Probably stuff that you haven't heard anybody else talk about, because again, I look more at the criminal behavior and the events leading up to things. Maybe we'll see. Maybe it'll be of interest to you. Mary Dethy Delzy, it's good to hear from you. What a FOIA request. FOIA is a Freedom of Information Act request, folks. It's a document that you can send in and request for information on criminal cases and other government records. It's part of what we used to call GRAMA, or grandma in some areas of the country, which is the government records access. And the FOIA request, they certainly could file. I don't think they'd have a chance through FOIA, Meredith, to get information back, because they're going to claim it's just an active investigation. And frankly, now that there's not a criminal case going forward, this thing could get buried pretty easily. So let's see, Bicoastal Mind One Zone. And I hope you all are like saluting me because I'm doing this without glasses because I'm so dang prideful. And I'm actually reading these without the back office helping me tonight. Is it reasonable to believe that the apparent increase in CP arrests in East Tennessee, child protection arrests, are not completely separate from the Summer Wells investigation? Images, metadata relating to her. So I guess we go back to is it possible? And again, anything is possible. And increase in those investigations as a result of summer, or the fact that there just are so darn many. And these, they're called IACA units, Internet Crimes Against Children units, are working around the clock on these child exploitation cases. I guess, yeah, anything like that is possible. So, yeah, interesting. Hey, folks, please shoot some questions over. I hope you're enjoying this new format that we've gone to. Colts every other week, a shorter live where we get right to the point. And then, of course, for those of you who are channel members at the Academy level, you're getting Academy stuff released on Mondays. And then I'm trying to get out a crime recap each week. And hopefully it's resonating with you. It's sure making it easier now that COVID is the restrictions are lifting a little. I'm starting to travel more and more every week and getting back into my old swing of things before we started Profiling Evil, which was just a ton of travel. Huge Ollie. A lot of people have a misconception on how a lot of people may use a gun. I may be I may be left-handed, I think you're saying, but I'm right-eye dominant, so I shoot long guns and handguns with my right eye. Really interesting. Yeah, and so this is going to be what's so interesting, and this is one of those areas where social media might be the thing that brings us answers, is a picture of somebody showing Brian at a gun range practicing, like we saw with Alex Cox, if you remember. These kinds of things pop up and they really teach us a lot, because then we see how an individual is doing things in the actual environment and how they react to things. So I think, yeah, you're dead on. We too quickly jump to assumptions or conclusions based on something and just a little piece of information. Sally Langerford, thank you so much for that kind super chat. Love hearing from you, and that is so kind that you would put that in, and thanks for thinking what I have to say might be worth listening to. So, Murder Most Southern, I'm enjoying the Academy. Yes, thank you. I hope you are enjoying the Academy. And folks, if you can't afford that Academy, it's only $4.99 a month. You can jump in and just be a supporter to us at $1.99 a month, get a little more notice on things, and it really does help us out a lot. We have kind of changed things up to make it a little more friendly for everybody, and I hope it's working out for all of you. So, Wendy Henschel, was Don Wells arrested, and for what? So if you're kind of stepping back, he was actually finally sentenced last week for the DUI that occurred, I think it was last October, Wendy. And in that, they sentenced him to a minimum of 180 days in the county jail. But it wasn't necessarily because of the drunk driving. It was because of the probation violation from an earlier event of domestic violence and some other challenges. So the question becomes, number one, I think it's great to get him out of the limelight and the temptation to go out and do something on the web. Let law enforcement do their thing. And still, I mean, I don't know if you all saw this, but last week TBI posted up another request saying, quit listening to people that aren't talking about things that are officially released sources. And I'm kind of boring because I kind of stick to that kind of stuff rather than speculating. And we need to think that, keep it in our minds. Jessica Henderson, thank you so much for that super sticker. Really appreciate it. So Don Reed, new YouTube member, welcome. Great to have you here. And maybe the back office could text Dr. Amy, see if she's out of surgery yet and can come in. Alicia, regarding Summer Wells, do you anticipate charging in that case this year? It doesn't feel like much movement. Boy, Alicia, I have no idea. This thing is so interesting to watch, and it has, uh, in the public view, ground to a halt. But I am confident that law enforcement is continuing to work like crazy for this little girl and trying to get this done. A lot of pretty judgmental things being said about Don and Candace. Heck, I don't know if they're responsible for this thing, but I sure am uncomfortable with the accusations until more comes out. But now we're going to see Candace, who has been near meltdown through this whole thing without Don there, and now having to, without income from whatever meager income he was making doing sheetrock, trying to hold that family together, I think is going to be really interesting. And I think we're going to see the pressure only increasing. And so this is going to be interesting to watch. Linda Williams, thoughts on the no-knock warrant where a Minnesota man was shot and killed? They were not looking for him. Yeah, I actually did a interview on national TV in regard to this case. And folks, if you haven't seen it, it's a case where law enforcement had a no-knock search warrant for a homicide suspect. They went to the right house. They went inside the house. They went in the early morning hours. I think it was 7 a.m. They were screaming police. They were in full tactical gear. They were coming in with a show of force, and a young man under a blanket on a couch pulled out a weapon and was shot by police. And this is really horrible because this kid had apparently had a licensed weapon. I don't know that he had a concealed weapon permit, but you don't need one inside of the home. But folks, if the police are yelling, "Don't move," don't pull a gun out from under the covers and then be surprised if you get shot. Now, there might be lots of angry people, but over and over again, if the police say, "Don't move," don't point a gun at them and then wonder why you get shot. I guess that's all I can say, Linda. And I hope I don't just really irritate a lot of you, but I don't get it. And I understand. Well, you might be confused and you might be protecting your domicile. I'd like you folks to just weigh in on the chat for a minute. And I want to hear from who sleeps with a handgun in their hand under the covers with them. That's the only question I want to know. And I'd love to see your responses. Now, I know people that put them in their nightstand, have them in the closet. I want to know how many of you sleep with a gun under the covers when you go to bed. So anyway, Crystal McCormick. So what's the deal with the box that Brian had? Holy cow. I have no idea. When Dr. Salerno gets on, we're going to chat a little bit about what I have kind of created as a map of where I think things were found. But again, I don't know that it really matters, other than over time, we may have information leak out. I'm going to talk more about, though, the pathway that he took and where things were found and why I think those are significant in the order of events that occurred. Bonnie Walker, how you doing? I understand almost all the skeletal bones were found. Am I correct? Yeah, and I actually asked Doc Salerno to bring in an anatomical photo tonight. And again, if she doesn't get on, we'll do it again in a week or so. But the majority of the bones were found. They were scattered around in some places. The majority were found in one location where the handgun was found. And it's not weird that the bones are spread around. Again, think about this. This was under 3 feet of water at one point. The bones have signs of depredation, and depredation is simply the term of animals going in and tearing the body apart, to go off and feed on it. And think about when you watch the nature movies and stuff, animals don't care. They go in and they try to get something to eat, and they try to get alone so they can eat it. There are gnaw marks on a bunch of the bones. There's evidence that would suggest that those bones were displaced from the original site where the weapon was found and the majority of the body was found. And again, it's not a conspiracy, it's just reality. The water itself will displace and move things around. And then, of course, depredation. So am I creeping anybody out yet, or just keeping it okay? All right. Don, are you still working with AWP on the Randy Leach case? Jared and I talk on a regular basis. I actually called Jared this week while I was at the top of a mountain preparing to look at a little body of water for something else. And we do talk about Randy's case and a number of other cases, including, as you know, there are cases that with Brian McKenzie now. I talked to Francis last night on the phone, and Brian McKenzie's remains have been identified. It's a case we worked with Adventures with Purpose on. And of course, we're still waiting on another case for identification on a woman from that case in the remains that have been found. So I missed Melissa's, if we could put it back up. I'm sorry. Locked away in the gun case in the closet. Oh, not available to anybody. Yeah. So, okay. So here's Tina. She sleeps with it under the pillow. So there you go. I've been a concealed weapons holder and carried a firearm as a police officer. And folks, I've never felt so nervous that I've needed to sleep with a gun in my hand in my bed. I just don't get it, but that's me. Ann Duke. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we put Ann back up again? I sleep with the gun under my pillow, but I live out in the country and we've had break-ins. Thanks, Ann. That's great. Murder Most Southern, not in my hand, but under the bed. Okay, there you go. Yeah. Gun, no gun in my house, but a bat. Dyson Crazy Adventure. Yeah, that's good. Let's see. My ex-boyfriend saw a Vietnam vet and slept with a loaded gun under his pillow. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of it too. I called a chief buddy of mine, and he was a combat medic veteran from Vietnam, and later was a Southern California chief. As I was getting ready to go on national news, and I said, all right. And his nickname's Black Cloud. I said, Black Cloud, do you sleep with a gun in your bed? And he said, not in 50 years. So again, that's for me though. That's me. And there's somebody else clearly here tonight that does. Why didn't these cops make sure they had the correct residence? They did when the shooting happened. Now, I've heard that they did go to another door first and validated that wasn't the correct place. They didn't kick doors down. Then they went to this one and went in. Do they have a responsibility? Absolutely. But make no mistake about it, Miss Elizabeth. According to everything that I've read, they were in the right location with a signed warrant from a judge with the authority to act in pursuit of a homicide suspect. And they went in announcing that they were law enforcement, and that's when it happened. And those are pretty heavy odds to stack in the favor of law enforcement doing everything they could to make that work out. Now, people argue you shouldn't do that in the morning when people are sleepy. That's exactly when you want to do it, because you want to get people off their game. When I served search warrants that were with violent felons, it was always in the early morning hours, preferably around 5 or 6 o'clock, because a lot of people stayed up late. I wanted to catch them off guard. Going there at 2 p.m. is not as safe as going at 6 a.m, even though it's troubling for some people. So, hey, I want to bring in my dear friend, Dr. Amy Salerno, and thank her for joining with us today. So let's bring her in. And Doc, how you doing today?
Well, I'm very sorry. We have had great technical difficulties.
Oh, well, You should have just made up something, said you were saving a life or, something
Mm-mm.
like that. But
No, no, I'm talking like it led to strong words.
well, hopefully,
My
hopefully
chin
it
is
wasn't against the girls
girls,
or the
girls.
back office.
No, it's the girls. And you see how my chin is red? I'm not happy.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Hey, Doc,
Tell me.
I sent you over the autopsy report
Mhm.
on Brian Laundrie today, and I wanted to just start off and just talk about this and show you something that I created. Of course, we're talking on that western side
Mhm.
of Florida,
On the Gulf Coast. Uh-huh.
and this is kind of the area. This is showing a map from driving from the Laundrie home up to the reserve where the vehicle was most likely parked. I don't know for sure. And then I went in and I tried to determine what I believed based on the evidence that I read in the autopsy report and other things that I found online, where I think Brian probably walked as he moved into this location where his
Mhm.
body was eventually recovered.
Mhm.
And it just made good sense. And again, because there were heavy waterways and other things, this seemed to make the best sense of how he would have approached the area. Again, we don't know other than just using some common sense. The red point on the map, the fuzzy little red point in the
Yes.
middle, is where Brian Laundrie's body was located, where the majority of the skeletal remains were located and the weapon was located. Then there was a secondary search area that was about 250 feet maximum to the east. You can see that in the circle. And then a third area that was about 250 feet to the southwest of
Mhm.
Brian's body, where his backpack and his notebook and some other things were contained. We just, you didn't have the opportunity to hear me as I talked a
I'm
little bit.
sorry. I'm not. I'm on a moving train.
Oh,
What stops have you made so far?
Before you got on, I mentioned that there are people that are disturbed by the bones being displaced into several different areas, and I explained that away with not only water but animal depredation
Mhm.
or the
Mhm.
movement from animals. And there's physical evidence that supports those bones. Bones have chew marks on them and other kinds of things that
Mhm.
support that theory. But as you looked at that and the bone displacement, one of the questions from the viewers was how much of the body was recovered. And in a very unfair way, I kind of gave you an assignment to kind of identify what bones were recovered
Yeah.
percentage wise. Maybe you could just speak to that.
Right. Well, I didn't actually have time to do the math, but just as a review, real quick, there are 206 total bones in the human body. Okay. In a cat, and there are like 244, and in let's say an elephant, there are 285. So if you look at the list on the autopsy report, I didn't do a full count. But I believe the vast majority were recovered. As I recall, I want to also say that I am not a mortician, nor am I a pathologist, but I did do, gross anatomy, and I operated and did surgery for many, many years on human beings. So I have some knowledge, but please don't, assume that I'm Miss Expert here on autopsy. But they did recover a huge number, the majority. From what I can glean, and I'd have to look back, Mike, I believe the feet bones were not all there, and there was some evidence of gnawing on the distal or the distal aspect of the bones of the leg, so the end portion of the bones. So that's why I think that all of the bones of the feet were not recovered, from what I can tell.
Yeah, and that would make really pretty good sense when an animal's tugging on the body. Those are
Yep.
the parts that kind of give way
Mhm.
first. And my experience in investigating these kinds of cases over the years was that again the animals are pretty smart. They're going to go to the soft chewy parts of the body before they start on the muscle mass and other areas.
Right. So, as a just as a reminder, I'm sure people already probably know this one. The most The hardest bone in the entire body is the femur or the thigh bone. And the knee has many, many different ligaments attached to it. So that and they attach from the quadriceps thigh muscles in the front, as well as the posterior thigh muscle. So getting that even to the knee would be very difficult for wild animals. So you're correct that going more distally, meaning a distance from our center, would be our feet or our hands. Yeah, that's where they would start.
You know, it again, this is such a morbid discussion anyway, to in many ways, but I go back to when I was a brand new cult investigator. I went out to a scene where some people were convinced that aliens and black helicopters came in and surgically removed the eyes and the uterus and the
Right. Yeah, I've heard
uh,
people.
yeah, of cattle. And I remember I took a fish and game officer with me out to look at this site, and I said, "Man, those eyes have been surgically removed." And he started laughing, and he helped me get past the forest to the tree and pointed
Right.
out the droppings from the birds that had been sitting on the head of the animal, and other things. And then of course the expansion of the body during that rotting process, and how it stretched the skin and kind of changed the whole scenario for me.
Well, Mike, I'd like to back up very briefly. I know that I'm running late and I want to honor your time frame, but I want to step back first of all to say that this is, horrific to have to go over anybody's autopsy, but especially in this horrendous case. And I'm very sorry for both families in very different ways. I when we did gross anatomy in medical school, we each were four of us, well, three for me, were assigned one donor body. I had a woman in her late 50s that had metastatic breast cancer, and so you can become sort of inured. You can become hardened to what you're doing because you're trying to learn and focus and etc over the months and months that we dissected. But at the end, and I don't know how many medical schools do this, but at the end, our medical school had a memorial service for all of the cadavers, and we invited all the family members. Is a way of thanking the donor bodies, and also to celebrate the lives that were lost, but that were given to science. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's really
Yeah,
powerful. It's
it is
interesting.
powerful. It really is powerful because I think people can think, "Oh, how horrible," but if it's done with gentleness and compassion, and that's why I loved my medical school, the University of South Carolina School of Medicine in Columbia, because they really were one of the first programs that had what we call the biopsychosocial model of medicine slash spiritual. And so it takes into account the whole human being. So I wanted to make mention of that. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, Mike, is a lot of questions have come up even before the autopsy came out. How could Brian's body, let's call it a body, remains, how could they have been skeletonized? And maybe he was only skeletonized and it had only been maybe 2 to 3 weeks. It depends upon the climb. And in the incredible heat of Florida, submerged in mucky, mucky water, which absorbs heat, it actually accelerates decomposition. And so you're going to see skeletonization within 10 days to 2 weeks. So that, because people were like, maybe they placed his body there. No, it is consistent with the locale of where his remains were found and the climate, the weather, etc.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And having spent time with the experts at Tennessee's Body
Oh
Farm,
yeah.
and going through what entomology means to these kinds of investigations, and heat, and animal deprivation, and water. Yeah, there's no question. And I want to dispel any rumors too. I think it is very clear that they had enough teeth, enough jaw, enough DNA to very securely identify that this was Brian.
Absolutely. No, I yesterday I read through the entire autopsy and then I skimmed it again today, and I there are some very telling things that I would like to hopefully share, but even beyond just the physical findings, but I think they did due diligence. There is no doubt about it. I am very encouraged by the fact that the FBI really was the one that spearheaded this, and the Northport law enforcement kind of followed behind, because I do think, honestly, they dropped the ball along the way, and they were not as, prudent as, let me just say it nicely, as they should have been with respect to having lost sight of Brian, etc. So it was reassuring to know that this autopsy process was spearheaded by FBI, and they called in forensic anthropologists. So I think it's important for all of us to know that.
Yeah, I would agree, and thank you. I created a little bit of a dramatization of what
Mhm.
I envisioned the bullet path to be in this particular case based on what I read in the autopsy report, but I really needed the backup of a medical professional to help
Mhm.
see if
Mhm.
I'm on track. And so I'd like you to watch this as it plays in just another couple of seconds, and then uh, just comment a little bit about that trajectory
Mhm.
and the troubling thing to me of a right-handed person shooting themselves in the left temple.
Mhm.
Certainly possible. Is it probable? And what we learned in this particular case from the autopsy report is that the bullet entered just above the ear, kind of in the perfect temple area where you would
Mhm.
expect many people wanting to commit a homicide, and was shot in a
Or suicide.
or I'm
Or
sorry,
both.
yeah,
Or both. Either.
and traveled in a oops in a let me get back there and freeze this here and put it where we can talk a little bit.
Mhm.
And then that it traveled in an upward and toward the front of the body trajectory. And I don't know what I've done here, but if I keep doing it, I think I'll have the back office fix it. But anyway, so what are your thoughts based on what you read? And let's just hear what you have to say as we kind of wrap up things.
Right. Well, I think that apparently Cassie, the sister, said that Brian was a dominant right-handed individual, and it is quite irregular in the many unfortunate times I've been in the ER and we've seen both murders and suicides, for somebody to be right-handed and to have the bullet, the projectile, enter on the left side to exit on that right side. And so the two things that I would say is, if indeed we're going to call this a suicide, I guess the only way I could imagine him doing it and would be as if he turned his head, he could get the gun this way or on the temple. And then the other thing is, did somebody do it? And it looked as if it could be a suicide, and we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you think?
I personally don't believe it was a homicide. I believe
Mhm.
it was a
Okay.
suicide. And I've wondered a lot of things, and this is where if you could get to these cases a little sooner, you could find gunshot residue on a
Yes.
hand to tell you which hand was used. You could theorize if someone used the thumb to pull the hammer, or yeah, you could in a trick shot maybe get a weapon turned in a way to shoot, but that's going to put front to back, which is less
Right.
likely. So this only makes sense. And then I started wondering, I wonder what his phone looks like and if he was doing any imaging of himself as he said goodbye and being dramatic or other kinds of things. And of course, many of these things we won't know. But what I wanted to try to dispel is that the easy thing to say is, "Holy cow, he was murdered
Right.
because."
Yeah,
I
I just put that out there as a little.
Yeah, and I really appreciated some of our listeners who dialed in and said, "You know what? I'm right dominant, but I have a stronger left eye, and I shoot, one way versus another." And that's why it's just so important that not a single piece of evidence becomes deciding factors in these cases, but it's a combination of all the
Right.
evidence.
And I was going to say, like, my younger daughter is supposedly right-handed, but she does everything with her left. I mean, she does all the important stuff with her left, including her kicking. So we really can't say. It is troubling to me, to be honest with you, Mike, that I think the whole social piece around this story, I don't mean Gabby, I'm talking more about the behavior of the parents, including if you look at the autopsy, when they were interviewed, they refused or they declined to comment on the social history. And also, if you look back at the Moab police stop when Brian got into the vehicle with the police officer to take him to the hotel, the police officer asked him if he was on medications. And if you listen carefully, he did acknowledge that he had some type of an anxiety issue and that he's supposed to, but he didn't like the way they made them feel. So, for the parents to say, there's like loopholes in truth. And so when sometimes we'll say to somebody, are you, do you have any medical problems? They're like, oh no, I have no medical problems. The next question is, do you have any psychiatric history? Because some people only think of medical as medical and then psychiatric. And it doesn't look as if that person who wrote the narrative, the law enforcement person, asked, or whoever it was, asked about psychiatric history. And also, so, there's a conflicting story there between the parents and what Brian shared with the police officer. The other thing is declining to talk about social history. It isn't just the social piece about what had happened between Brian and Gabby, but social history includes tobacco, vaping, marijuana, illicit drugs, prescription drug abuse. It includes a whole constellation of social things and aspects to our lives. And to me, it was very compelling in a negative way that the parents opted to decline all that information. So even in death, he was being protected by his parents.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Meredethi Delzi, thank you so much. That's really kind. Amy, one thing that I wanted to touch on quickly before we kind of bring this to a close, because I promised everyone I'm going to try to start keeping these things a little shorter, is in these kinds of circumstances, toxicology is next to impossible. Did you see anything that jumped out to you from a toxicology standpoint?
Well, I don't think you can comment right now on toxicology. I do know that they took a portion of the bone, inner portion of the bone, hoping to extract some maybe pieces of marrow, something where they could get some toxicology. But I think, as you and I have spoken before, in a freshly deceased body, one of the best places is your orbit, is the globe, because it's a confined space. You can pull right out and you can really get a great toxicologic specimen. Also, if somebody's had a head bleed and that's walled off, that's a really good place. Then, they go for sometimes the liver, the spleen, etc. I did nothing really so far, but maybe it did to you. Did something stick out to you, Mike?
No. I want to talk quickly about the behavior and just get your sense on this, because here's the picture that I painted. Number one, his tent had not been unpacked.
Mm-hmm.
His equipment was put in a couple of places, some displaced by predators, animals, others just naturally. And what I am envisioning is that because if he disappeared on September 13th and wasn't reported until the 17th, I believe that he probably killed himself on the 13th, and that he was so despondent and so distraught that he walked out, didn't set up camp. He may have had plans to go out and hide out, but it was just too overwhelming. Dropped his gear, wrote his notes, and then wandered a short distance, and then most likely executed himself.
Well,
And
that's what I think. Go ahead, and I'll give you my input too. Go ahead.
yeah, and I just think all of that just fits behaviorally with the driving the vehicle there, the pathway taken, the location of items that were discovered, and the location of the body. And then finally, I want to say, interesting that he was wearing a Moab hat,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so nice to finally hear that it was a weapon that was different than was used in Moab.
Right. Yes, I agree with you. Just wanted to say that another portion that was missing from the narrative, and I think that when we look at an autopsy, you want to look at what's there, right? But you also want to find out what's missing.
Yeah.
And that includes a social or historical aspect to the narrative. And I scoured it. I didn't see anywhere where the parents first walked in. There's no narrative with respect to the fact that they were the ones that took a beeline to that site and the father a beeline to the woods to find a bag, right?
Yeah.
So the narrative starts with the police being called that there are remains or something. So that troubles me because I really would like to know how did that get led to that they went right there? What was the trigger, so to speak, no pun intended, for that morning for them to get up, for them to decide this is the day that we're going to do this? Number two, I believe, as you do, in leakage when people speak. And if you go back to the interview by Bertolino, he leaked, in my opinion, that Brian was, quote, grieving on the 13th. And that, I believe, his leaving and, quote, being grieving was prior to her being found deceased. Gabby, is that so, as I recall, or?
Well, no, I don't know that I can say one way or another, but I do recall the exact same kind of a thing. And it just fits. And when
Mhm.
these things fit and make sense, it's much easier to paint a picture that you can say, I can see step 1, 2,
Mhm.
3, 4, and 5. And
No, I think it's very consistent. It's just a shame that we don't have some of the other pieces to the narrative regarding the parents. And the last thing I wanted to mention is a lot of people believe that if a person is a narcissist, which, I have never met him, but I believe that he has, at the very least, Brian had malignant narcissistic traits, that they love themselves so much that they won't commit suicide, and that just simply is not true.
yeah, no,
People who are narcissistic do commit suicide. Other uh, myth that I would like to quickly dispel would be, well, he had his tent, he had this, he had that, so he was prepared to camp out. Well, many, many people commit suicide, the urge overtakes a person literally from 1 minute to the next.
yeah,
So it doesn't mean that there was something nefarious, like somebody came and murdered him and he had the intention to go camping and hide out. It is quite common that people who are despondent, etc., will commit suicide, and it can be a split moment decision. And so that his suicide remains consistent with the fact that he has in his bag the tent, etc.
I would agree with that. A couple of things that I will be really interested if they ever release more evidence is if there were more rounds than just the 2 rounds in the weapon, something indicative that he intended to be gone longer or that the weapon was intended for something beyond his own personal use, like we saw in this particular case. That's going to be something. If they ever release the notebook, that's
The
going to
little
be
wooden
obvious.
box, the
And
little wooden box
yeah, and the
with
box has got a
the
lot of people,
mhm.
creeped out. They're trying to figure out what's in that box, but,
But it is I wanted to ask your opinion on the fact that the Northport police never said that that this person was likely armed and dangerous. That never went out to the public. Isn't that kind of unusual? I mean, the parents knew a gun was missing. They
yeah,
believed that he had taken the gun. Should we not have been notified?
it's really, I'm not gonna you know me, I mean,
I
I'm
know.
just not gonna second guess law enforcement and the quality of the information that is publicly released versus what may be really accurate. I don't know either. When you look at things just from what's socialized, those things really get troubling, and then you find out the old Paul Harvey rest of the story kind of a thing. So I don't know.
I would have
Interesting.
liked to have known if this guy was out there with a gun and, that he's potentially armed.
Yeah.
I you know,
Yeah. Well, there you go, Doc. Thank you. On a moment's notice, you agreed to look and jump in, and folks, It's just so I'm echoing what I'm reading there. It's just so good to have Dr. Salerno back on.
Well, thank you for inviting. It's been quite a while.
It has been, yep, and we've really kind of changed things up a little bit here, and I've kind of toned down and tried to get things a little more concise. We went longer than we intended, but it
Sorry.
was the right thing to do. I've had a really busy week with Court TV going over this new popcorn killing trial that just launched this week. And folks, if you get a minute, I'm going to be on Court TV in about an hour, and we'll be talking about I can't tell you what we're talking about, but two cases that are kind of intriguing. One that you have heard over and again, and one you've never heard of, celebrating the 20th year anniversary of a homicide that occurred. And I might just say, as I close out, 20 years ago tonight, Amy, I was sitting in the Olympic command for the 2002 Winter Games. And the person that I go on Court TV each week with is a retired FBI agent. And last week, in the middle of Vinnie Politan talking about something, we discovered we were in the same intelligence unit during the Olympic Games 20 years ago.
How prophetic.
And so it was really fun to think about the fact that 20 years ago we were tied up in the middle of the games.
You
And
see? There you go. And then you came back together.
all the planets just keep aligning.
Yep, aligning. Hey, listen, before I go, I want to just recommend to you, I know you're very busy, but maybe to the people in the chat, and this is related, I've thought about this, to this whole case of Brian Laundrie and the social piece of the parents and truth-telling and lack of truth-telling and protection, etc., of children. This novel is written by Claire Pooley. I read not too long ago. It is brilliant, and it is called The Authenticity Project. And it is basically about an older gentleman. He writes something in a blank notebook, kind of one of these type of notebooks. And he basically, the novel opens with him saying, what if we all told something about our true secret selves? Something that could be life-changing for other people that we know. And then he tells about himself, and then he leaves the notebook at a cafe, and the story, basically this notebook makes it around the world, and each person that reads it decides, yes or no, whether they are willing to be truly authentic and transparent to the strangers of the world, right? And to reveal a little bit about their secret self. I have been very moved in a negative way by this case. And it has, in the sense of, I think there was a lot of not truth-telling and a lot of protection of different individuals. I have also, therefore, done a lot of discernment and self-reflection as a parent, and really have to wrestle with myself. And this book, The Authenticity Project, really helped me to think about this. And it's light and romantic, by the way. It's great. Am I being my authentic self? And am I raising my children to be authentic? And in a case where my child were to do something egregious criminally, how would I as a parent respond?
Oh, yeah. What a challenge.
These are questions I think go beyond the scope and should go beyond the scope of this autopsy, right? To learn something.
Dr. Amy Salerno, thank you so much. What a perfect segue for me to say, folks, think about joining our Profiling Evil Academy, because we're going to be talking about this very thing, Amy, but not the book. I want to get the book now, but I'm going to be talking in there in a couple of weeks about something that we call the 3 portions of a person's life, or the 3 individual personas. The public piece that you and I are putting on right now, the private piece that only those that are pretty close to us ever get to see.
Oh, like the screaming match my child and I had. Yes, that's the private.
And then that secret side, which sadly is often only exposed to the victims of horrendous things. And so it'll be interesting. But I just want to say again, thank you. You are loved and deeply appreciated. And I look forward to talking to you again. And to everybody from the back office and from me at Profiling Evil, thanks so much. Please watch for Thursday for the weekly crime recap. Thanks, Amy. Good night.
Bye, Mike. Bye, all.